Hi guys, so in today's video we are going to talk about one of the foundational and then the very most important services in AWS. We are going to talk about identity and access management, simply put as IAM. IAM is a service, right, that controls who can access AWS, what they can access, and what they are allowed to do on the AWS. You see, when you create your AWS account there is something you have that is called a root user. With root user, it kind of has full access to everything with regards to your AWS account. So it's not best practice to work with your root user account. So what you do is you manage your permissions, you manage what people, users, entities, services, and all other extra accounts, what they're able to do in your AWS account. And where you do that is what we reference as your identity and access management. So let's just get right into it. So I'm first log into your AWS account and then search for IAM. Once you have IAM, you'll see your dashboard. What I'm going to first do is to walk you through how we can create a user. Pretty much a user is an identity with long-term credentials that is used with your AWS account. So just see a user in this form as say a human being, right, with login credentials, right? They can either log in into AWS through console, or you can give them access keys so that they'll be able to access your AWS accounts through CLI commands and all that, right? So a user is pretty much a real person who have access to your AWS account in one way or the other, right? So if you want to simply create a user, you have to first do something. You have to understand what that user is going to do in your AWS account. What permissions do you want your user to have? And what activities? So pretty much the permissions are going to define the activities that the user is going to perform in your AWS account, right? We have two forms of permission sets that you can associate with your user, right? In AWS, we reference them as policies. So it's either an AWS managed policy or a customer managed policy. I'll quickly show you guys that, but let's quickly go through this. So say I want to create a user called Kobe, right? And then I want to give my user a console access. I want the user to be able to log in into AWS console just like this. So I just select that auto generate password. This is recommended, so I leave everything as default, and then I'll click on next. So this was the permissions that I was talking about. What activity do I want the user to be able to do? Right? To assign the permissions, there are few ways you can do that. One is to attach a policy directly to that user. So we have a list of policies, AWS policies, that you can select. So for example, if I want this user to be, say, an admin, right? I want this user to have an admin access. I can just select that. This is one way. We have some we call a customer managed policy, right? That defines certain things that that user could do also. The customer managed policy are pretty much policies that you create yourself. Just after this, you are going to walk through how you can create your own customer managed policies. But I have one like this. In this account, that kind of starts with DynamoDB. So you can see a DynamoDB permissions that I have that shows this, right? I'll speak more about these policies very soon. So this is one way. You can select the permissions and attach them directly to that user. Or you can assign that user to a group. When we say a user group, it's pretty much a collection of users, right, with one assigned permission. So for example, you have a group of administrators who will be managing your AWS accounts. What you can do is to create a group. Say in my case, I have one called admin, and then I will attach the policy to that group. So any user in my account that has who forms part of your user group will have that permissions attached, or that policy attached to that user group. So those are the ways. Or I can easily come in here, copy permissions from one user, and then associate it with that. So these are some of the ways that you can approach this. In this case, I'm first going to create and select attach a policy directly. So I'm going to select the admin access for this copy user I want to create. What that I'll do is to click on next and then click on create user. Once the user gets created, this is the username, this is the console login URL, and then the user password. I can choose to download a CSV file and then share it with the user, or if I want the email sign-in option, then I'll do that. So this is one of the ways you can do this. That is to create a user in your AWS account, right? The next thing I'm going to quickly talk about is user group. As we saw, we're able to select a group for that user when we are creating that user. Or if you want to, you can manually create your user group, and once creating it, so for example, if I want to do a test user group, I can do this and then select the users that I want to add to this group, select my permissions, and then simply create user, and then that is it. So this is how simple you can create users, assign permissions so that they do what you do. Always remember, in AWS we work with what? The principle of least privilege, which pretty much means that just give people just the permissions they need to do whatever activities that they want. Don't overgive or don't undergive. Give them the permissions that they require. So that is it. Now let's quickly transition to how we do this stuff, right? In AWS we reference them as policies, right? So a policy is pretty much a JSON object that defines the permissions. So whatever you're able to do in your AWS account is dependent on the role you have and then the policies in that role, right? Or if you use the permissions that you have, and that permissions comes in the form of these policies, this JSON document. Let me quickly open one and then simply explain that. So as I said, your policy is mostly in JSON, and then the policies has three parts. The first part is the effects part, we have the action part, and then the resource. When we say the effect part is this: it defines whether you are allowed to do or you are denied. So mostly you either see allowed here or denied here, right? But by default, almost everything, if you don't have permissions, AWS is not giving you the permissions to do that, right? So you will see that the effects for this administrator access is this: we are allowed. The action talks about what you can do. So we are allowed to do everything. Anytime you see an asterisk in your permissions, it means pretty much everything going forward. So we are allowed to do everything. And then the resource, as the name implies, is the entity, right? Or the service, or where you are performing that action on. As I said, if you see asterisk, it means what? On all resources. So what this means is we are allowed to perform all actions on all resources. So this is pretty much your policy. So anytime you are creating your own policies and all, these are the things you are going to be working with. Let me simply just take another one and then explain something real quick. There is someone here, API Gateway Administrator. Let's go through this. What this is telling us is this: we are allowed to perform all API Gateway actions. You see the asterisk here. On what resources? On all API Gateway resources. So it's constructing the ARN that if you have any ARN that is like this, right, which pretty much kind of shows that this is an API gateway, I want the owner or any entity with this permissions to perform all actions. So that is pretty much it. All these policies you see here is something we call AWS Manage. As I said, we can create our own customer managed policy. So that's what we are going to do next, and then I'll quickly come to roles. So to do that, we simply click on create policy. Now AWS is doing everything to make everything very easy to do, or everything very easy to work with. As I said, your policies are in a JSON format, but now through the AWS console, you're able to easily do this for beginners, right? You can easily click it. If you are not comfortable working with your JSON, you can easily click this and then you go. To create a policy, you first have to understand what permissions you are looking for. As we got to know the action, right? What action do you want to perform and on what resources? So for example, in our case, say I have a Lambda function and I want my Lambda function to be able to get items from a DynamoDB table, right? I want my Lambda function to be able to get item, retrieve item from my DynamoDB table. What I can do is I'll come in here and then I'll search for the service that I want the Lambda to have permission on. So I'm looking for DynamoDB table, and then in here I have a list of all the available permissions they have, right? So I can just expand them and then select the ones I want. In my case, I'm looking for one we call a get item. These things, as you work with AWS and the various permissions, once you go through the documentation, you see the necessary permissions you need, and then you can assign them. In my case, I want the get item, so I'm going to select this, and then I will come down to the resource section. So the resource, as we saw, I can choose to restrict my policy, right, or my permissions to a particular resource, a specific resource, or a specific group of resources. Or I can give access to all, that is asterisk. In this case, I'm going to select all. All that I'll do is click on next. And then it will require me to give my policy a name. So let me say my Lambda DB policy, just so that it becomes easier. This is optional. I can proceed to create it. So what this policy is doing is this. Let me quickly search for it. It was a customer managed, so I should see it somewhere. So this is it. So look at this. So look at my JSON. I'm allowed to perform what? DynamoDB get item on all resource. So whatever, any Lambda function that has this, right, associated with it should be able to perform DynamoDB get action on every database, unless the database has permission restricting stuff or handling its own security. Else it should be able to access or be used on all resources which it should work on. So that is how you can easily create your policies. What you have to understand is you have AWS managed and customer managed, right? AWS managed are managed by AWS, customer managed by you. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is roles. Roles is an identity you can create that has specific permissions, right, with credentials that is valid for a short time. So if you have, say, a service, and then you want the service to be able to perform certain roles, right, certain activities based on certain permissions, what you can do is to create a role and then associate that role to that service. So every service, as I said, every entity and all that performs activities in your account, one way or the other, is working with permissions, right? And then you can manage those permissions or assign those permissions through roles. So to create a role, there are two forms of roles too. There are some that comes by default in your account, and there are others that you can create. So to create a role, you just click on create role, and then you select the entity type, right? Is it going to be an AWS account? Is it going to be a SAML federation, a custom trust policy? Is it going to be a web identity stuff? Say you are working in AWS and then it's going to be an AWS service. You just select AWS service, and then now AWS, as I say, is making things easier. They can just give you a simple template. If it's a Lambda function, you just select your Lambda function, right? And then I'll click on next. On this page, I have the room now to associate a policy, right, a permission to this. So in my case, with my Lambda function, I wanted to associate my Lambda DB stuff policy to it. So I'll just set for my policy and then I can select it. And then I'll click on next. I can then proceed to give my role a name. So let me see. Lambda Dyna role, right? So let me call this way. So see, so I'm saying I want my Lambda function, I trust it to assume this role. I'm zooming. I want my Lambda function to be able to assume this role. So that's what this pretty much means. And then you click on create role. So that's how you can easily create your roles on AWS. So now if I have a Lambda function, I can easily go into the Lambda and then associate it. But the purpose of this video is to explain to you guys what these policies are, how to create these roles, associate them, and then do whatever you want to do. There are a number of things too that you can do, identity providers, and then do some fancy stuff, route access management, and do a lot of things with regards to IAM. But these are the basic things you need to understand as a beginner when working with IAM. Once you are creating rules, you are creating policies, you are creating all that, the permissions, how to edit them, and then do all that. All that you need now is going to be this. Thank you so much for watching this quick video on IAM and then what it actually does. There are a lot of videos that will be coming that will talk about some of the details and advanced stuff for its regards to IAM. So please do well to subscribe to the channel, drop like, comment, share this video, and then let's meet in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.